The Chiefs could miss the playoffs. Yes, Patrick Mahomes is a really good quarterback, but there is no way that they win the Super Bowl this season, and I'm here to tell you why they might not make it to the playoffs. Before I get too far, I do want to be clear that I think they might have the best tight end in football, and a top 10 quarterback for sure. Is he top 5? I don't have him there, but I'd listen to arguments for it.
What?
I wanted to show I just don't think they suck. I just don't think they're built to win this year at the same level that they have over the past few seasons. Let's look at their schedule last year and then compare it to this season. Last year, they got the lowly NFC East and swept them as they should. They also got to play the AFC North in a down year and went 2-2, losing to the Ravens and Bengals. They are obviously in the same division they were in last year, but the AFC West is nowhere near the same as last year. They went 5-1 in the West last season, with their only loss coming to the Chargers. The Chargers added Khalil Mack, the Broncos added Russell Wilson, let's ride, and the Raiders added Devontae Adams. The rest of the division got better, and in some cases significantly, while the Chiefs traded away Tyreek Hill and let Tyrann Mathieu walk in free agency. I think 3-3 is reasonable, with 4-2 being the best case scenario. Let's now look ahead to the 2022 schedule. Without predicting every single game, I want to look at their opponents overall. They go from the NFC East to the NFC West, much tougher. I imagine they go from 4-0 to at least 3-1, but 2-2 is possible as well. They go from last year's AFC North to the AFC South. 3-1 still sounds good, possibly 4-0. Then they get to play the Bengals and Bills, both of which beat them last year, and you top it off with the Bucs as your extra NFC opponent. In those 3 games, I think you're looking at 2-1 at best and 1-2 at worst. Without talking about the details of the team so far, I think schedule alone could drop them 2 or 3 games, which would have them at 9-8 or 10-7, already on the outside looking in. Now, moving on to some of the stats that were troubling to me when reviewing this team from last year. Their full season team versus opponent stats are incredibly poor when you compare them to other top teams. For example, the Buffalo Bills as a team threw for 1,500 more yards than their opponents and threw for 24 more touchdowns than their opponents. You might be saying that's just because they have such a good passing team. Well, they ran for nearly 400 more yards and 1 more touchdown than their opponents as well. Let's drop to a slightly less dominant, but still good team. The Buccaneers threw for 1,200 more passing yards and 17 more touchdowns than their opponents, and rushed for 100 more yards and 7 more touchdowns than their opponents. Now, let's look at the Chiefs. They only threw for 500 more yards and 10 more touchdowns than their opponents, but rushed for 44 fewer yards and only 1 more touchdown than their opponents. Their overall defense is what scares me the most for their future. There is typically a correlation between giving up yards and giving up points. There are teams at both extremes that give up a ton of yards and very few points, or teams that give up a large amount of points with a smaller number of yards compared to the league average. For example, the Seahawks last year were 28th in the league in opponent yards per game, but 12th in opponent points per game. They allowed teams to march down the field, but typically held them to field goals or forced turnovers. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the Panthers. They were second in the entire league in total yards allowed, but were 20th in the league in points allowed. Typically, this means the team is turning the ball over to give opponents short fields or pick six and scoop and score situations, as well as poor special teams coverage that can provide a short field. In some cases, the Seahawks situation is repeatable to a certain degree with a good defensive scheme, a team that runs the ball well to control the clock, and a little bit of luck. However, the vast majority of the league's yards allowed are plus or minus 3 spots from their points allowed. The Chiefs are sitting at a differential of 9 spots between their yards allowed and their points. To me, they're not a defensive-minded team that can rely on repeating this. I think they'll have to slow teams down or those yards will soon become points. Kansas City was 4th in the league in scoring last season. Tyreek Hill accounted for 9 of the 37 receiving touchdowns last year. Not only that, but he completely takes the top off of the defense and is the number 1 player on the scouting report week in and week out. Without him out there pulling away safeties, you have to assume that Travis Kelce sees a lot more double coverage and becomes a higher priority. Juju Smith-Schuster and MVS are both solid receivers in their own right, but Juju has never hit 1,000 yards as the number 1 target, and MVS has never hit 700 yards in a season. Juju did hit 9 touchdowns 2 years ago, but MVS averages just 3.3 TDs per year. I don't think you can expect the same 37 touchdowns from Mahomes this year as last. So let's pretend that the running game stays the exact same, and you only drop by 3 passing touchdowns. 34 touchdowns would still put you in the top 10, tied with Joe Burrow last year. That means 21 fewer points scored all season. That lowers the average points per game from 29.4 to 28.1. That could easily be the difference of 1 game. To me, this Chiefs team is in the most vulnerable spot they've been in since Mahomes took over the starting job. He's going to have to carry this team to a lot of wins on his own for them to get back to the postseason. After diving into the stats and their roster, I think they end up with a record of 10-7. To me, that's just not going to be good enough to get you in the playoffs on the AFC side. Thanks so much for watching. If you're a Chiefs fan, let me know why I'm wrong, or let me know why you agree and what I missed. If you hate the Chiefs and only came to celebrate someone saying they won't make the playoffs, thanks for being here. Leave a like, consider subscribing, and I'll see y'all next time.